my background is I'm a teacher by training, but I'm secondary trained, and then I saw the light and started working in early childhood. And I actually worked for 2 Prime Ministers, and I spent a lot of time trying to lobby the last 3 Prime Ministers to talk about the focus of early childhood education and the difference that can make for children. And I can tell you that right now we have never had a Prime Minister as focused on early childhood education and care ever. I can also tell you that we've got Commonwealth Government ministers who the second or third thing out of their mouth when we talk to them is talking about the power of early childhood education to close gaps, to change the life trajectory for children and to really tackle disadvantage. And so we're sitting in a context now where early childhood education and care is absolutely central to the new government's political narrative, it's central to their economic narrative, and it's central to their social narrative for the type of society we want to see here in Australia. And that's flowing through in lots of areas. So at the Job Summit a couple of weeks ago, early childhood education and care, our teachers, educators were absolutely front and centre in that debate. And so the change of the federal government gives us a new opportunity to build on the $9 billion of investment that Jenny spoke about earlier, to really transform our sector so it looks the way we always wanted it to look, so that it is delivering for children and families in a way that makes sense for them, so that the children who need the most can get the most, so the children who need the best quality can get the best quality. And I just want to take this point to just acknowledge that it is all of your hard work in the community over decades to reinforce the value and importance of early years. That's why people are listening. And whether that's just things you've done in your community, whether it's participating in research, it took that type of groundswell across our communities to secure the $25 billion worth of investment that I'm going to touch on briefly. So Kevin asked what some of the big ticket reforms were and the implementation and how we're going to make sure this delivers for the children who need it the most. So we've got a $5 billion investment that kicks off next year to improve affordability and accessibility, which will deliver big improvements for children in low-income families. We've got new commitments to improve educator wages through the Fair Work Commission, which is really significant. We've got a new whole-of-government early years strategy, which is being led by the Social Services Minister. And she's really important because she has the $25 billion a year of family payments sitting within her portfolio that many of our families rely on week in and week out. And my personal favourite is the Prime Minister's signature policy, which is a 90% commitment to universal access for all children from birth. So that's really about the first 5 years for children. And of course we have the Victorian commitments that we talked about earlier that we'll be building on. So when you bring those commitments together along with a very high level narrative across our community that early childhood is really central to the type of society that we want to see, we have all the ingredients for a really truly child-centric reform. And as the teachers and principals and leaders working in early childhood, we've always known the system was the wrong way round. We've always known that we were starting too late and that the children who needed to come the most were the least likely to attend and couldn't come for the numbers of days that they needed to come to really make a difference. But Kevin talked about us being guardians, and I think of us, we are the custodians of early childhood education experiences in our communities. And in the past, we've been hamstrung by policies and funding settings, and that's the transformation, that's the opportunity to flip our system from one that's focused on what the adults are doing, that's focused on blunt rules about when children can start and how many days they can come, to a system that is actually focused on children, where every child can attend for as many days as they need to make a difference, starting at an age that best meets their needs, and crucially, that funds and values the opportunities for you to work in partnership with families to deliver that true continuity through childhood. It's where educators are paid fairly and your voices are valued right across the education system and in the community. So I can understand that some of you might feel a bit sceptical about what I've said. I have been told I can be a bit of a Pollyanna when it comes to these things. But I think one of the first rules, as we know from early childhood, is to have high aspirations for children. And we have to have high aspirations for these reforms. So if we bring that mindset as the custodians of early childhood education and care in Australia, as you all, as the custodians of fabulous early childhood experiences for the children and families in your communities, no one knows your children better than you do. No one knows your families better than you do. And so it's up to us to have high aspirations, to drive quality improvement, to insist that our voice is listened to and valued, so that the children who most need to benefit do benefit from these reforms. And finally, I'd just say, Kevin, we don't have to do this alone. It won't happen overnight, but we have the evidence, we have the political will, and we have partners to help us. And I think most importantly, we all collectively have the motivation to see this through, because we know it's what children deserve.
Thank you, Myra. Myra, if we stick with access for a minute, which is, I think, in a sense, I want to focus that with the reforms. Last year there was a report, was it last year, the Mitchell report on the deserts?
Yeah.
So there's a report, you'll know, published in Australia that indicates that a third of children don't get access to early learning. I'm just wanting to ask you about, do these reforms tackle that problem?
They absolutely do, and it's my favourite one that tackles it. So the 90% subsidy is about saying actually every single child in Australia should be able to access a high quality early learning experience, and it shouldn't matter where they live.
But from should be able to, I'm just working out how you make sure that, who's going to provide that? How will we?
And so so there's a big reform process set up by the Productivity Commission, which one of the key things it will have to deliver is to figure out what does that look like across Australia. And so in some communities, it will be doing more of what you're already doing now. It might be just continuing to do what you're doing now. But in that report, which referred to the fact that there are some communities, not just rural communities, there are inner city areas too, where children can't get access to the numbers of days that would make the biggest difference for them. And so this process, which will take a number of years, this isn't a switch that's going to flip overnight, will be about looking at markets, looking at service providers and understanding how can we meet the demand. If we, instead of saying children should be able to access early learning so their parents can work, and instead we said every single child in Australia should be able to access at least 3 days and more if they need it, well then how do we design the system to achieve that? And we have the processes and the investment to kind of bring that to life.
And colleagues be aware that I think Victoria's gone the next step and said where the market is failing, we're going to create 50 of our own.
Well, and I think that's one way, that's
I'm not saying it's the right thing, I'm just
approach.
saying that's what they've said.
Yeah, that's what they've said, and I think the thing is why it might be more than 50.
Right.
We might need more. But if we start with the principle that every child, whether they're a refugee, should have access to this, well then we need to build it so they can come.
Okay, thanks Myra.